Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a fascinating source you've shared with us, really getting into the weeds of Croatia's long and pretty intricate history.
It really is. A history written across millennia, stretching from the very earliest human inhabitants all the way up to its place in the European Union today. It's quite a sweep.
Absolutely. And what's so striking about Croatia, I think, is how visibly this history is layered onto the landscape itself.
Oh, definitely.
You see it in the geography, the way those like rugged mountains just slice between the coast and the inland plains, and those unique karst features, the sinkholes and caves.
Shaped by water over ages, yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's the architecture. You can't miss it.
Right. The sheer scale of the Roman amphitheater in Pula,
Incredible.
the imposing medieval walls of Dubrovnik, the intricate design of Yugoslavia Cathedral. It's clear this is a country positioned at a profound crossroads.
It absorbed so many influences. Illyrian, Celtic, Roman, Slavic, Byzantine, Ottoman, Habsburg, Latin, you name it, for centuries.
And that position, that geographical crossroads, it seems like that's been the defining force throughout its history, hasn't it? Shaping conflicts, alliances.
And the very identity of the people.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it's central.
So our mission today is to use your source material as our guide to really unpack these layers. We want to understand the key periods, the, dramatic transformations, and the persistent challenges that have molded Croatia into the vibrant country we see today.
And hopefully uncover some genuinely surprising details and connections along the way. Make it come alive a bit.
Exactly. Should be fascinating. Okay, let's start right at the beginning then, in prehistory. Our source immediately highlights that incredibly diverse landscape you mentioned.
The mountains, coast, the Pannonian Basin inland.
Even those geological features shaped by seismic activity and water. How does this geography play into the very earliest human presence?
Well, the source points to archaeological evidence showing hominids were present here for just a vast stretch of time. We're talking Middle and Upper Paleolithic periods.
Wow.
In fact, the region is home to some of Europe's most significant and best preserved Neanderthal bones.
Neanderthal bones right there in Croatia. That really drives home the depth of human history in this place.
It truly does. It shows a continuous deep root here. And then following the Neanderthals, you get anatomically modern humans appearing.
Okay.
Their presence is documented from the Upper Paleolithic onwards. And researchers seem particularly interested in developments happening right in this specific southern region.
And the Neolithic communities that followed are described as equally enigmatic, which I guess suggests there are still puzzles for archaeologists to solve, right?
Exactly. But archaeological understanding is constantly advancing. Our source mentions, for example, the predictions about early copper working in continental Croatia,
Right.
which were based on geology, have now actually been confirmed by findings. Actual metal objects, and even waste from the production process.
So they weren't just like living here, they were developing technology pretty early on, like metalworking. What about their homes and settlements?
Well, we have extensive documentation of prehistoric settlements, some in caves, but also out in the open air.
Okay.
Early dwellings were fairly simple round huts, but over a couple of thousand years, especially in areas around modern Zagreb and on the edge of the Pannonian Plain,
Yeah.
these developed into quite sophisticated multi-layered structures. They use materials like wood, clay, mud brick, and stone.
And what's really cool is the source mentions researchers are using experimental archaeology,
Rebuilding them.
essentially rebuilding these ancient structures themselves and even creating immersive reconstructions to help the public visualize how these places looked.
It just makes the distant past feel much more tangible, doesn't it?
Totally.
And another fascinating layer our source adds is genetics. Studies from a Copper Age cemetery reveal a population structure linked to geography and, importantly, evidence of matrilineal descent.
Matrilineal descent in the Copper Age, so lineage or inheritance passing through the mother's line. That offers a really interesting glimpse into the social organization of these very early communities, maybe different from what we might assume.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
And looking even wider, genomic studies are allowing for cross-national analysis now. They're connecting genetic patterns to things like the spread of languages and major population movements.
Ah, okay.
It shows how these early groups weren't isolated. They were part of broader migrations that really alter the genetic landscape of the region.
Okay, fast forward quite a bit and we enter the Roman era. Our source tells us that after the Iron Age, the territory that would become Croatia was essentially divided into 3 Roman regions: Pannonia, Illyricum, and Dalmatia.
Right. And Rome had a strong motivation to conquer this area. Part of it is described as a kind of nostalgic drive for lost territories, which the source suggests smoothed the path for expansion.
A nostalgic drive for conquest, that's a phrase that definitely sticks with you. And the source highlights an astonishing chain of victories in the latter half of the 1st century BC.
Under figures like Caesar, Lucullus, Pompey.
Which led to Rome quickly conquering almost the entire area we know today as Croatia.
It happened remarkably fast. It seems paradoxically that the internal strife within the Roman Empire during its civil wars actually fueled these new conquests. The purpose, once things settled down a bit, was strategic, acquiring land for defense and resources, even settling slaves brought from as far away as Sarmatia, a term often used for people north of the Danube.
So military goals and provisioning the empire were the core reasons for Rome's push here. Where did they set up their main hubs?
The source identifies Scardona, located at the mouth of the Kruka River, as the key center for trade and administration in the Roman period.
Okay, Scardona.
And to facilitate access, the first Roman road built here ran north from Scardona towards the Kupa River. That opened up the route into Pannonia. Building that infrastructure was clearly vital to controlling and, well, utilizing the territory.
And the evidence of their presence is just everywhere, isn't it? The source lists ruins of settlements, villas, forts, temples, theaters, roads in places like Nerona, Sitae, Anatolia, Salona, and, of course, Pula.
What's truly remarkable, as the source points out, is the sheer durability of Roman construction. I mean, core buildings they erected are still in use today.
No way.
Yeah, and you find well-preserved remains of their towns lying directly beneath modern cities.
Like those Roman baths built by Empress Calla found underneath a church in Pula.
Exactly.
The fact that parts of their structures are still integrated into the fabric of modern life, that's incredible continuity. And those excavated ruins in Pula, including the iconic amphitheater.
Oh, the amphitheater.
That really gives you a sense of the scale of their presence.
It really does. And let's not forget Emperor Diocletian. The source knows that he, seeking peace from the pressures of state, apparently found it in Split.
Right.
Construction on his massive complex there is his mausoleum, living quarters, a summer residence, started as early as 293 AD. That structure, what we now call Diocletian's Palace, remains the absolute heart of Split today. It wasn't just a building, it was this unique blend of palace, fortress, and industrial center.
Amazing. So after centuries of Roman dominance, a massive demographic shift occurs with the arrival of the Croats. Our source places this around the early 7th century, part of those large-scale migrations happening across Central Europe.
Yes, Slavic tribes began settling in the Pannonian Plain and along the eastern Adriatic coast. The source is careful to note, though, that they didn't arrive in an empty land.
Right, there were existing populations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Particularly the descendants of Romanized peoples along the coast, the Dalmatians, and other groups making up what the source calls the East Adriatic milieu.
And the way the source phrases it is quite evocative. The newly arrived Slavic people won a land. They weren't simply given it. They established themselves through effort and maybe conflict, taking a territory that had been previously inhabited by Illyrians and significantly settled by Romans.
It really highlights that transition of power and identity. And the source describes their early interactions with the Adriatic Sea, seeing the islands for the first time, learning to fish, starting to build ships.
Shows a rapid adaptation to the coastal environment.
Definitely. Contact with the sea clearly changed their way of life. They also began interacting and trading with others, like Venetian horsemen, exchanging goods like furs and wools.
And their military capabilities.
Also mentioned. They came equipped with iron weapons, bows, arrows, swords, tools necessary for both defense and, well, expansion in a pretty contested region.
And a truly pivotal transformation noted by the source is their eventual conversion to Christianity.
Huge. That would reshape their culture, their alliances, their entire place in Europe, really.
The narrative then moves towards the formation of a distinct Croatian kingdom. Our source marks the start of this process with King Tomislav around 924.
Yes. Tomislav accepting the title of king is presented as the foundational moment. He's credited with achieving a significant degree of unity through military successes, basically consolidating power and establishing his state.
And the source calls out King Porn's recognition by the Holy Roman Emperor as another key landmark, sort of signifies a growing presence on the European political stage.
Exactly. This period lays the groundwork for a long and, let's say, complex relationship with Hungary. The Croat-Hungarian state union, originating from 1102,
Right.
is explained in the source as stemming from a blend of factors.
Right.
There's the Croatian desire to maintain their own distinct identity and independence,
Okay.
but also the strategic need to form a stronger front, a bulwark, against the rising power of the Ottoman Empire.
So the Union wasn't just about being subsumed by a larger power. It was partly a strategic choice for mutual defense and a way for Croatia to preserve some autonomy.
That seems to be the argument, yes. And what's particularly interesting, according to the source, is the nature of this union. It was initially uncodified, meaning it lacked a clear, formal, written constitution outlining the relationship. Yet despite this, Croatia is described as remaining a whole entity well into the 16th century, unlike some other territories under the Hungarian crown.
So even with internal troubles and Ottoman pressures, the idea of a common state structure persisted.
Yes, and the source identifies the Croatian-Hungarian Compromise of 1868 as a highly significant turning point. It's presented as giving a new creative impetus to a Croatian state renaissance.
Right.
Croatian aspirations at this time included a strong desire to reunite historical lands with similar rights and a sense of irredentism.
The idea of reclaiming territories.
Exactly. Reclaiming territories with Croatian populations outside their immediate control, which was encouraged by the outcomes of the Balkan Wars.
So the 1868 Compromise, while a formal agreement within the Union, was something Croatia actively pursued and, as the source says, gladly entered, seeing it as a way to solidify its position based on its history of state traditions.
Yes, the source calls it the very basis of a joint state for nearly half a millennium by that point. The Union is characterized as continuous since that 1102 start date,
Okay.
with mutual state institutions for joint affairs. Evidence cited includes the Hungarian crown appearing in Croatian state documents, Croatian traditions using sovereign titles, and even the adoption of a Croatian-Hungarian coronation ceremony in 1660, which was apparently preserved.
And the source mentions specific historical artifacts that reinforce this sense of continuous state tradition within the Union: the Great King's Rods, a valuable 11th century Lagolitic charter, and the Table of Kings from 1095.
These documents and items serve as tangible proof points for the arguments about Croatian statehood traditions during this long period. The 1868 Compromise specifically established a mutual division of authority, defined joint affairs, and ensured a mutually safe and alternating official language,
Right.
confirming Croatia as a representative monarchic self-administrative country from that point forward.
And the detail about the Franciscans pleading for the indivisibility of the Hungarian state, while still showing respect despite past indignity, that just adds another layer to the intricate political, national, and religious landscape of the time.
It's incredibly complex.
That complexity certainly deepens when we talk about the Ottoman threat. Our source dedicates attention to the Republic of Ragusa, modern-day Dubrovnik,
Right, Ragusa.
and its clever efforts to maintain a form of semi-independence, first from the Byzantines and later the Ottomans.
Ragusa was a city-state that masterfully navigated some really treacherous political waters. But the Ottoman Wars happening close by brought, as the source puts it, unrelenting disorder and chaos, specifically to the frontier regions of Croatia linked to Ragusa's hinterland.
The source really paints a vivid, difficult picture of life on that frontier. Constant attacks, looting, famine, plague, the severing of trade and communication with the city, the desolate state of the inland areas. It mentions how frontiersmen were driven to brigandage, sometimes dramatically called sons gentlemen.
And this wasn't just petty crime. The source indicates it was a widespread phenomenon, really affecting the social fabric and economy. Conditions became unbearable. It temporarily cost Ragusa its frontier populations and inland connections, leaving the city feeling like a type of virgin city girded only by the sea.
That image is quite poignant, a city isolated by conflict. The source also points to specific military events, like a battle near Cattaro in 1646, which initiated the Morea War.
Right, and this brought even more brigandage and devastation to the borderlands. It highlights a complex situation where even these brigands sometimes participated in a larger war effort.
Really?
Which the source describes as unexpected, perhaps suggesting some underlying grandiose morals, even while acknowledging the prevailing moral decay due to the harsh conditions. It's messy.
This is where the shift to Habsburg rule becomes crucial then. The source explains that after the defeat at the Battle of Mohacs in 1526, the Croatian nobility made a strategic decision to choose the Habsburgs as their kings.
A pivotal moment, really, born out of military necessity. The Habsburg monarchs, based in Vienna, ruled Croatia through their title as Hungarian kings, officially styling themselves King of Hungary and Croatia.
And the Croatian parliament, the Saber, is noted as having significant powers, legislative function, the right to decide domestic and foreign policy, even taxation.
True, although much of the collected income often ended up in Vienna.
Ah, right.
However, the source strongly emphasizes that following Mohawks, the absolute overriding priority under Habsburg rule became fighting the Turk, the Ottoman Empire.
Everything focused on that.
Pretty much. Reforms were enacted primarily for defense, and the source notes these reforms had the effect of diminishing the Croatian parliament's independence and its representative nature.
So the existential threat from the Ottomans meant security concerns took precedence, impacting internal autonomy. The focus for the Croatian nobility in the later 17th and early 18th centuries was squarely on pushing the Ottomans back.
And that led to significant conflicts and territorial changes. The source mentions battles near Varazdin and a decisive victory outside Buda in 1683. The fall of Buda in 1686 was a major step. But even then, while cities were taken, large territories remained under Ottoman control.
The lasting impact came from the peace treaties then.
Exactly. The Treaty of Karlovitz in 1699 is noted as placing Croatia entirely under Austrian Habsburg control.
Fully under Habsburg control.
And then the Treaty of Passarowitz in 1718 solidified those gains, fixing the borders and resulting in the regaining of significant territories. This included the whole of Slavonia, parts of western and northern dioceses, the Kordun region.
Okay.
Essentially reclaiming what the source refers to as the Croatian lands. This brought a much larger unified territory under Habsburg control and marked a fundamental shift in the region's political map.
Okay, let's brace ourselves, because our source describes the 20th century in Croatia as just a series of dramatic upheavals.
That's putting it mildly. It was a period of intense, rapid change. The source highlights the sheer volatility. 2 assassinations of prominent figures, and living under 4 different state unions within just about 30 years.
4 unions.
Starting with Austro-Hungary, transitioning into the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, later Yugoslavia.
Right.
Then the brief independent state of Croatia, NDH, during WWII, and finally, socialist Yugoslavia.
Just trying to follow that timeline is dizzying. The source notes that throughout this period, the struggle for Croatian nation-building and establishing statehood was constant, accompanied by painfully felt dilemmas, which were even recorded in the literature of the time.
Entering the kingdom of SHS, that first attempt at a unified South Slavic state after WWI, brought immediate and significant challenges. You had national identity issues, political struggles, and what the source calls existential challenges. There were fundamental dilemmas about whether the state should be a centralized, unified entity, unitarism, or a federation of distinct peoples and regions. A debate complicated by Serbian political and military dominance, which the source describes pretty bluntly as hegemony supported by armed power.
Then World War II explodes onto the scene. Nazi Germany's attack in 1941 leads to the rapid occupation and dismemberment of Yugoslavia by the Axis powers.
And this is the context for the establishment of the independent state of Croatia, the NDH. The source describes its formation with incredible speed, unexpectedly, in an organized and well-prepared manner as a product of political reorganization.
Okay.
It was led by the Ustasha movement, which had been founded earlier, partly in response to the assassination of the prominent Croatian politicians Stepan Radic and the subsequent repression.
And the source provides a pretty stark picture of the NDH. Its statehood was short-lived and superficial, immediately plunged into conflict with partisan resistance movements, and struggling with both Ustasha and Chetnik forces vying for control.
It mentions the heavy accusations of treason leveled against NDH leaders, and frames the period as intertwining individual tragedies with deep collective national traumas. While the stated goal was full independence, the source notes a critical lack of strategic direction, poor handling of problems, and a virulent nationalism specifically directed against Serbs and others linked to the previous system. It quickly devolved into a severe dictatorship and was effectively accepted as a puppet state by its Axis allies.
Following the war, the landscape shifts again to socialist Yugoslavia. The source explains the pre-war Kingdom of SHS was renamed the Kingdom of Yugoslavia in 1929, its constitution abolished.
Right, though a new one in 1939 did grant Croatia extensive autonomy. But that kingdom disintegrated with the 1941 Axis invasion anyway.
Yes, so after liberation in 1945, Socialist Yugoslavia was formed, initially declared a federation of equal peoples and nationalities.
Yes, it was formally named the Federal People's Republic, and later in 1953, the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, or SFRY.
And its structure was established as 6 federal republics: Croatia, Serbia, Slovenia, Montenegro, Macedonia, Bosnia, and Herzegovina, along with 2 autonomous provinces located within Serbia. That framework defined the political structure until its breakup.
Which brings us to the event most central to modern Croatian identity, the War of Independence. Our source pinpoints the Declaration of Independence from the SFRY on June 25, 1991.
And that declaration directly triggered the war, didn't it? Lasting from 1991 to 1995.
Yes, beginning with the attack by the Yugoslav People's Army, the JNA. The source states the fundamental cause was an ethno-nationalist regime in Belgrade seeking the secession of the Yugoslav parts of Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, which escalated into a full-scale war.
So it wasn't just a conflict, but really a fight for survival and recognition. The source highlights key milestones like international recognition on January 15, 1992.
And admission to the United Nations on May 22, 1992.
And the war concluded with the signing of the final peace agreement on November 18, 1995.
The moment of independence itself is given real weight in the source, the Croatian Parliament's proclamation on June 25, 1991, at 6:01 p.m., declaring, "We are free. We are a sovereign state." Quite dramatic.
You can feel the weight of that moment.
The new constitution and related laws came into force that same day, building on a powerful mandate from a historic plebiscite where 83% of voters participated, and a remarkable 93% supported independence as a sovereign state.
A huge mandate. And actions were taken swiftly. The parliament instructed all state authorities and armed forces to reject SFRY authority.
Right.
And letters were sent to the UN and other countries seeking recognition based on this declaration and the clear will of the nation.
Now, the challenges and opportunities section of the source really underscores the brutal reality of the war period. It describes the early 90s as bleak times, fighting for independence under sanctions.
The devastation sounds immense. More severe for Croatia than for Slovenia, with control lost over a third of the territory and its population.
Intense conflict, marked by ethnic cleansing, significant economic dislocation. The source mentions the myth of a greater Serbia in this context as a driving force behind the conflict. The human cost and resource loss were just staggering.
And external support was critically lacking.
That's what the source states. Croatia was banned from importing arms, denied purchases from neighboring countries and Western states, and forced to acquire older weaponry, like rusting AK-47s from Bulgaria.
Fighting for your existence while being prevented from acquiring the necessary means of defense, that detail really highlights the difficult position Croatia was in. And the international perception, according to the source, was complex and sometimes damaging.
Yes, it mentions a cautious leader's image tarnished, with accusations related to torture and execution. Excessive bloodshed and chaos were attributed, rightly or wrongly, to a lack of respect for international law and human rights. The source also notes that the early 90s policy of supporting Croatia's disarmament and trying to weaken its regional position did not turn out well, suggesting it didn't actually help resolve the conflict.
And a sobering point. Prominent mediators representing the UN, US, Germany, and the Church are described as having essentially failed to stop systematic violence.
It was a brutal time.
Following the war, Croatia's international standing changed dramatically with its independence. Our source touches on the complex post-conflict situation in the region, particularly the complicated structure of the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Right, and the significant efforts required from the Croatian Defense Council there. It notes that while the UN and the Peace Implementation Council oversaw the peace process, they couldn't fully anticipate the persistent inter-ethnic tensions and distrust that continued to simmer.
And it highlights how foreign policy and domestic governance became deeply intertwined, especially regarding Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo.
Internally, Croatia's transition to democracy involved significant social, political, and economic transformations, which the source describes, maybe understatedly, as complicated.
A new constitution was adopted in 1990, aiming to establish a liberal parliamentary democracy. But the source notes that modernization lagged behind the aspirations.
Yeah.
And a crucial need for a political partnership based on pluralism and fellowship remained unfulfilled, which it frames as tragic.
The HDZ party, in power from 1990 to 2000, played a central role, leading the country through the war and that initial period of independence. The source reiterates that the struggle for national self-determination was a legitimate and, given the history, probably inevitable aim.
Mm.
But it was resisted by neighbors, particularly Serbia, which possessed significant military and psychological power.
After the disintegration of Yugoslavia, there was this forceful process of reasserting Croatian identity, often intertwined with nationalism, the violence of the war, and economic crisis. The perception, particularly from the outside, was of a rapid transition to a new European republic, with the European Union serving as a key aspirational goal.
Right. Zagreb's efforts to join the EU involved conscious political moves to convince Brussels of a repudiation of the past and a commitment to European norms. This included pursuing bilateral agreements and collaborating with neighbors to foster regional stability. That cooperation was key.
And a significant turning point mentioned is the signing of the Stabilization and Association Agreement, the SAA, in 2002.
Which the source describes as a clear prelude to EU membership.
And this leads directly to Croatia's major post-independence goal, joining the European Union. Croatia became the 28th member state on July 1st, 2013.
And it was the first country significantly impacted by the Yugoslav wars after Slovenia to achieve this milestone.
The source highlights the basis for its successful membership bid, demonstrating over 20 years of democratic development, establishing a stable market economy, and proving itself as a regional leader in transnational cooperation.
But the source emphasizes the difficulty and importance of building relations with former adversaries after suspending ties during the war decade. Explicitly demonstrating regional cooperation was a strict prerequisite for EU accession. Learning to be a good neighbor required major adjustments in policy and mindset.
You can imagine.
And this requirement connects deeply to the EU's own foundational identity, right? Rooted in peace and reconciliation after centuries of conflict in Western Europe. The source sees the EU's effort to stabilize and democratize the Balkans through accession as a crucial undertaking, but notes its fragility and how international changes sometimes delayed membership for other candidates. Croatia was seen as a leading candidate in this specific effort.
Let's pull in some threads about national identity, drawing from those sections you mentioned earlier. The source points out that the experience of building a nation stretches back for Croatia all the way to the 7th century.
It does. And in the 1990s, during the war and its aftermath, nationalism was explicitly utilized as a tool to discipline and to build identity and boundaries, creating a clear us versus them dynamic.
Right.
The source also mentions how external perceptions, what it calls the West's reality-inventive style of representation, also shaped beliefs and contributed to creating these identity boundaries, influencing national sentiment.
There's a fascinating tension presented here. The narrative within Croatia of returning to Europe after being separated by decades of communism and war, contrasted with an external image sometimes tarnished by war, embodying ideas of martyrdom, victimhood, and Balkanism.
And after 1995, the source notes that Western questioning of Croatian efforts on minority rights was sometimes interpreted internally as further radicalization, which probably complicated post-war reconciliation efforts.
The decade leading up to Yugoslavia's collapse is identified as a crucial turning point for defining national identity and finally establishing de facto statehood. This meant achieving true sovereignty, independence, resolving that fundamental Serbo-Croatian conflict over borders and autonomy, and finally founding a nation-state.
Redefining historical narratives, interpreting national symbols, modernizing institutions, ensuring security, transforming the economy, building the nation, establishing a clear identity. These were all parallel processes that took over 2 decades after 1990. The source notes this period saw a strong nationalist reawakening.
And a key factor in modern Croatian nationalism, according to the source, is the strong emphasis on the concept of historical rights.
Yes. Based on centuries of statehood traditions and self-rule within various unions, the nation-state model was chosen as the primary strategy to guarantee the country's existence and territorial continuity. Documents supporting these historical claims were widely publicized.
So the source's summary of modern Croatian society brings these threads together. An independent state with a turbulent past, but also immense natural beauty attracting tourists. Operating on free market principles since 1991 and an EU member since 2013, with hopes tied to improved living standards and economic opportunities stemming from that membership.
And it recaps the long arc we've covered. Roman influence, Slavic migration, the union with Hungary, navigating Ottoman and Habsburg rule, periods of national renaissance, the 1868 compromise, the instability of WWI, and entering the first Yugoslav state where Croatia was, notably, the least developed part economically.
Our source also dedicates sections to the importance of cultural heritage and the path of economic evolution. Starting with heritage, it's called the very core of every nation.
Which makes sense. It encompasses the vast collection of customs, traditions, material goods accumulated over centuries: language, music, dance, folk arts, rituals, cuisine.
Everything.
Everything created by humans that reflects their sense of who they are and where they came from. It includes both tangible things like buildings and objects and intangible things like stories and skills.
The source identifies a potential pitfall here, though. Heritage can sometimes be seen as ancient, old, and forgotten,
Yeah, like something dusty on a shelf.
with younger generations occasionally dismissing the value of what came before. It labels this a dangerous cycle.
And stresses the profound importance of knowing and remembering the legacy of ancestors and actively encouraging its appreciation in future generations. Valuing history is presented as essential to keeping heritage vibrant and relevant. Makes sense.
Turning to economic evolution, the source asks a pointed question about Croatia's historical economic standing. It references a study comparing per capita GDP from 1500 to 1913 across 16 sampled European countries.
And the findings presented show that initially, around 1500, Croatia ranked lowest among those sampled countries.
Dead last. Wow.
It remained near the bottom, ranking last in 1700 and second to last in both 1800 and 1850.
And the source notes that by 1850, 1870, the gap in GDP compared to countries like Austria and even globally had widened significantly.
Right. There was expansion and industrialization in the later 19th century, and the Croatian parliament gained more control over the joint budget in 1907. But the overall picture painted by the source is one of significant historical economic disadvantage compared to many Western European nations.
The source also touches on the complexities stemming from Croatia's heterogeneous population, a mosaic of diverse territories, languages, religions,
Catholicism, Orthodoxy, Islam, each with internal variations.
and ethnicities. This heterogeneity, the source suggests, contributed to a complex, sometimes uprooted political landscape and fostered what it somewhat densely calls extremely fast shrewdness in innumerable arguments.
Which I think basically means the challenge of governing such a diverse society, drawing on various political and identity threads, was immense and required a certain agility.
Yeah, that makes sense. To wrap things up, the source looks at tourism and future prospects. It sees tourism as a major, significant opportunity for the country's socioeconomic development.
Absolutely. It highlights the need for the sector to adapt to modern trends, focusing on ecology, emphasizing local identity, promoting active vacations, ensuring high service quality, and developing selective forms of tourism rather than just mass tourism.
Croatia has natural advantages, of course. The famously clean sea, the beautiful coast, abundant natural and cultural beauty.
Definitely. But the source points out the underutilized potential inland in continental Croatia, which also offers significant natural beauty, cultural richness, and gastronomic experiences.
Tourism is already a critical part of the economy, isn't it? Contributing 15–20% of the national product.
And supporting around 12% of employment. In 2013, it accounted for 60 million overnight stays and $7 billion in revenue, shows its importance, but also that there's room to grow and maximize its potential.
The source calls it one of the country's most efficient and competitive industries, noting its 2% share of national GDP and its crucial role in shaping Croatia's international image.
And it specifically identifies food tourism as having strong potential, building on the foundation of the food industry. Research suggests the basis exists to develop a distinct Croatian gastro-identity and promote the country as a high-quality gastronomic destination. That synergy between tourism and the food sector.
Makes sense. Looking ahead at future prospects, the source states clearly that Croatia's future depends on its development as a democracy and a member of the European family of nations.
It reiterates the enormous internal and external challenges still faced, including ongoing attempts by some neighbors to undermine territorial integrity and the vital need to fully establish a satisfactory level of democracy and political stability.
Stabilization in the region through peace, democracy, and the rule of law is highlighted as absolutely crucial for Croatia's path forward. The source even notes the need for determined politicians to navigate these challenges.
And for the EU accession negotiations, the process highlighted specific areas requiring determined reform, particularly the judiciary, police, and broader political culture. Commitment and measurable progress in these areas within a few years were essential.
Right.
Croatia moving ahead, while others like Montenegro were still seeking dates, was seen as important to avoid a third tier of candidates and keep the momentum going for the region.
So what can we take away from this deep dive? We've journeyed through Croatia's incredibly long, complex, and let's face it, often turbulent history.
Yeah, turbulent is the word. From the earliest evidence of human life and Roman rule, through the settlement of the Croats, the formation of a kingdom, that long union with Hungary.
Navigating the pressures of the Ottoman and Habsburg empires, the dramatic and unstable 20th century with its multiple state formations and wars.
The hard-fought struggle for independence, and the subsequent path towards European integration.
That's a lot.
It is undeniably not a history of simple, peaceful development, but one marked by diverse, powerful influences, constant struggles to assert and maintain statehood, periods of being part of larger empires or unions, moments of intense resistance, and ultimately achieving hard-won sovereignty.
This history isn't just academic, it's fundamental to understanding modern Croatia. It has indelibly shaped its national identity, fostered a deep sense of resilience, and directly informs the challenges and opportunities the country faces today.
And as our source points out, engaging with this past is in the self-interest of Croatians themselves, to understand who they are and to defend their history against misinterpretations. And the source reminds us that the country today is a unitary state, but one built upon the historical foundation of distinct traditional lands like Croatia proper, Slavonia, Istria, and Dalmatia. These regions still matter.
Ultimately, this deep dive helps us understand not only Croatia specifically, but offers insights into broader, universal themes. The complex process of nation building, how identity is forged and maintained in regions that serve as historical crossroads, and the persistent challenges countries face when navigating the influence and power of larger neighbors and evolving international structures.
This long and multifaceted history really does raise a profound question for you, the listener, to consider. Given the centuries of external rule, numerous conflicts, and the constant process of identity formation we've discussed, how does that historical experience of maintaining cultural and national identity, despite all these external pressures, continue to inform Croatia's path today as a fully sovereign state, operating from within the framework of the European Union?